Welcome to the latest episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. This is episode 231, Detoxing from Sugar and the Idea of Sugar Addiction. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. Today I'm continuing the discussion about carbohydrates in my ongoing series about carbohydrates. So if you follow along, you've been listening the last month or so, I've talked about what are carbohydrates, what fiber is, and explained a lot about fiber. And then last week was about net carbs. And today, of course, I'm talking about the idea that people need to detox from sugar or there's such thing as a sugar addiction. If you spend any time online, you probably see the claims, at least I do, or talking with people. There can be programs promising to break you of your sugar addiction, plans designed to help you detox from sugar, messaging that frames sugar as the root cause of pretty much every health problem out there. And I see this a lot in my professional work. I should say I hear it a lot in my professional work as well. Conversation with clients. I see it in marketing that just confidently says they're going to free you from your sugar addiction and how awful that is. And people do feel very strongly about these ideas, but I want to make this clear. Feeling strongly about something doesn't mean it's fact. So today I want to approach this from a clinical and evidence-based standpoint, not about a fear-based message, an emotionally charged one, or people saying the reason they eat a lot of sugar is because of an addiction. So first I want to start with what addiction actually means. Now addiction clinically is a clinical definition. Usually it can be referred to as substance use disorder. That could be alcohol, other substances. There can be other types of addiction related to behaviors like gaming and sex and that sort of thing. But let me go with substance use because this is about ingesting something. Substance use disorder, what we used to call an addiction, has a specific definition. And it is characterized by compulsive use despite harmful consequences. And this includes loss of control, tolerance, withdrawal symptoms, and significant impairment in daily functioning. So some people say, yeah, I do have a loss of control and I have withdrawal symptoms when I have sugar and stop sugar. But here's the other thing about addiction. This impairment can show up as a loss of housing, a loss of employment, legal consequences, strained or lost relationships, medical complications, and in some cases, stopping the substance requires a supervised medical detox because withdrawal can be dangerous and potentially life-threatening. And I've said in the past, in my work, I support individuals in recovery from alcohol use disorder, opioid use disorder, stimulant use disorder, so what most people would consider drugs. And these are serious life-altering conditions. And not once has anyone described being in recovery from sugar. And this is an important distinction. As I said, addictions involve substances or behaviors that the body does not require for survival. We can live without alcohol. We can live without recreational drugs. We can live without gambling, shopping, social media. We cannot live without food. We cannot live without energy. And as I said in a couple episodes ago when I went over what carbohydrates are a primary source of energy for the human body. Glucose, which is often labeled broadly as sugar in these conversations, is essential for brain function and normal metabolism. The brain relies heavily on glucose to operate efficiently. So when people use the word addiction in relation to sugar, we have to ask whether it meets the clinical criteria. Is sugar addiction a diagnosed medical condition? No. Sugar addiction is not recognized in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So there is no official psychiatric diagnosis of sugar addiction. Now, this does not mean people do not experience cravings. It does not mean eating behaviors cannot feel distressing or out of control at times. But those experiences don't automatically mean the definition of addiction. Often, what's being described aligns more closely with cycles of restriction and deprivation. So when a food is labeled as forbidden, dangerous, toxic, psychologically, we respond as humans to more intensely desire those things that which are forbidden. So if we're told that sugar is dangerous, toxic, our brains want to bet, and we desire those more. That's not addiction. That's a human response to scarcity. And I also want to talk about the brain because that's where a lot of dramatic comparisons come from. So you may have heard this statement that sugar lights up the same reward pathways as the brain, or in the brain, as cocaine does. So sugar and cocaine equal in what it does to the brain. And yes, that is technically true, but it's also misleading at the same time because many things activate the brain's reward system. Music, social connection, laughter, exercise, an accomplishment, falling in love, holding a baby. Dopamine response alone doesn't mean we have an addiction. I don't know people who have an addiction to holding babies or an addiction to music or laughter. That lights up the same part of our brain as sugar does, and apparently cocaine. So, food is meant to activate reward pathways, because if it did not, we would not be motivated to eat, and that would be a problem for our survival. Substances like opioids and alcohol, as I said, affect the brain far more intense and disruptive ways. They override regulatory systems. They alter tolerance and withdrawal patterns in a way that sugar just doesn't do. Now, some studies that attempt to frame sugar as addictive rely on animal models or extreme intake scenarios that aren't reflective of typical human eating patterns. Human eating behavior is influenced by culture, access, stress, sleep, hormones, mental health, and dieting history. And by reducing all of that complexity to a sugar addiction, oversimplifies the issue and increases fear around eating. Now, let's talk about detoxing. So what does detox actually mean? Well, detoxification refers to removing toxins from the body. It's pretty straightforward. And we've got some organs that do this. The liver and kidneys are responsible for this process daily. They function continuously without the need for a special cleanse or elimination diet. And guess what? Sugar is not a toxin. So when people say they are detoxing from sugar, what they usually mean is that they're eliminating foods with added sugars for a period of time, though definitions or what they're doing will vary by the person. But that's not the same as removing sugar entirely. So again, as I said, sugar is a type of carbohydrate. Sugar includes glucose, fructose, sucrose, and lactose. And these are naturally present in fruits, vegetables, milk, yogurt, beans, and whole grains. So to completely eliminate sugar would mean avoiding bananas, berries, carrots, dairy products, and many vegetables. And that would significantly reduce nutrient intake and dietary variety. So the context here matters. Eating a piece of fruit is not the same as eating candy. Fruit comes packaged with fiber, vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and water. And again, the overall pattern of intake matters more than isolating one nutrient. That's no way to live. And I also want to address more about why restriction often backfires. I hear these long lists of foods people refuse to eat. No sugar, no dairy, no wheat, no rice, no potatoes, no bread, no grains. And at some point, it seems like this list of exclusions, the list of no's, is longer than what people can still eat at that point. So I say, rather than going through the list of what you can't eat or what you won't eat, why don't you tell me what you can? But for some individuals, rigid rules feel manageable in the short term. For many others, restriction increases preoccupation with food, guilt, and cycles of overeating. So again, when the brain perceives scarcity, it responds by increasing focus on the restricted item. Cravings intensify. And this is not a failure of willpower. It's the brain attempting to restore balance. If there actually is scarcity of food, then we need to be hyper-focused on where we can get it. But we don't live in an environment, most of us don't live in an environment where there's food scarcity. But this is biology, this isn't weakness, this isn't self-control. So how can we reframe the fear around sugar? Well, one, sugar is not inherently good or bad. It's part of the carbohydrate family. Some sources are nutrient dense. Others are primarily for taste and enjoyment. The issue is not moral. It's about overall dietary patterns. Fear-based messages about sugar, or any food really, often distract from more meaningful conversations about variety, balance, adequacy, satisfaction, and consistency. And if someone wants to reduce sugar intake, that can totally be approached in practical ways. Instead, I tell people, let's focus on adding more whole foods rather than banning specific items. Pair carbohydrates with protein and fat to improve satiety. Eat regular meals to avoid extreme hunger. Eat at regular intervals. Read labels to understand where added sugars appear, not to create anxiety, but to make informed choices. And when I say read labels, don't be obsessive about it. Just glance at it. Look at the added sugars. Look at the ingredients. And here's the thing, flexibility matters. There's a difference between being mindful and being rigid. Added sugars do not need to be eliminated to support health. The overall dietary pattern is what carries the most weight in our long-term outcomes for health. So the bottom line is this: sugar is not a toxin. Sugar addiction is not a medical diagnosis. Detoxing from sugar is not a physiological necessity. What many people need is not a cleanse or a reset. It's a better understanding of carbohydrates, fewer food rules, and a more realistic relationship with eating. Nutrition does not improve when it becomes smaller and more restrictive. It improves when it becomes more informed, balanced, and sustainable. So with that, I want you to take this information, share it with somebody who's really needs to hear that sugar is not addictive. They don't need to detox. And that understanding the big picture is so much easier when we can sort through the noise and stop talking restriction. So I just want to mention, as I usually do, I have a blog that accompanies this podcast episode. You can find that link in the show notes, as well as on my website, the blogs and prior podcasts for all things carbohydrates and all the prior 230 podcasts there, or anywhere you find your podcast where you listen to this. That's a great place to start. All right, everyone, you have a great week ahead. Take care and bye for now.